painting an image in Photoshop. So I'm going to open my brush panel, which I have it open. If you do not have it open, go under the window menu and select brush. When there is a check mark in front of the name, that indicates that that panel is indeed open somewhere on your desktop. So my brush panel is open. Let's talk about what we see here. So typically you're going to get these types of settings for any of those painting tools. We have some presets, and if I click on presets, these are presets that have been saved on Photoshop for me, where I have saved them and it has remembered. So with these, we have a size here, and we can increase the size, decrease the size. I'm going to uncheck a few things here so that we see just the typical brush. There we are. So we have a size, we have a roundness, we have a hardness. So if I decrease the hardness, you see how the edges are beginning to become more soft. There also is a spacing, and the spacing basically, if I increase that, you end up with a dot. So instead of one continuous line, it becomes a dot. Okay. Now under the dynamics here, we can choose some of these dynamics, and all of them have different settings. If I just turn these on and turn these off, you can see what's happening here. So with the shape dynamics, let's go to that one, and you have to pay attention. I can check these. That doesn't mean that I'm to those settings. Whatever the darkened line here, this option, that is what I am seeing. So under the shape dynamics, let's undo these, because you can get things set and forget. Some of these are sticky, meaning I can set it today, go back tomorrow, forget what I set, and wonder why my brush isn't working right. So with the shape dynamics, I get a size jitter. Jitter basically is a randomness of the elements. So a lot of these will see a jitter. Here's an angle jitter, here's a roundness jitter. Actually, we have all of these options for most of the painting tools with jitter control. And so I can control size, I can do the angle, I can do roundness. That's what I'm seeing here in this specific setting. I also have a jitter with my hue. That would be under color dynamics. I have it with saturation, brightness, opacity, and flow. So jitter is randomness of that dynamic element. In some of these settings also, we can choose to have pen pressure if you're using a stylus. We can also have a fade. And fade is measured in steps. And we can do steps from 1 all the way up to 9,999. And so what I'm doing here with fade is I'm having steps. So the larger the step, the larger the fade. And a step is equivalent to 1 mark of the brush tip. So again, if I just go back to the brush tip shape, this is the size. I'm at 30 pixels. Okay. So in this fade, if I change this to say something like 10, and I go out here, what will happen is it fades away. When I click and drag, it fades quickly. And so my size jitter, it's changing, fading down within 10 steps. Like I said, the larger the step, the longer the fade. It's kind of like a skid mark left by a tire, if you can think of it that way. So it determines how and when colors fade towards the end of the brush strokes. Now something that I just did that you want to be cautious is I had the wrong layer active. I have layer 0 active. So what I just did with my painting tool is destroyed that original image. You have to be aware with those painting tools, they are not going to automatically make a new layer. So you have to be conscious of what layer you have currently active. I'm just going to do a Control or Command Z to undo it, go up to my layer 1, and that's where I can be drawing. And again, I'll just experiment here. Let's go up to about 50 and show you. I get a little preview here, and you can see within 50 steps, I'm going to fade out. All right, so you can play around with these settings. Like I said, there's scattering, If we turn on scattering, you can see how my brush stroke will scatter. We have texture, we have a dual brush, and as I'm clicking these, I'm turning these on. So if I start messing around with the settings, I'm going to get a very complicated brush stroke. So here is my hue jitter, so I can increase that hue jitter and saturation jitter, so that means we're going to fade out. You can see what's happening. The wet edges is one that's kind of fun because, let's turn these other ones off. Wet edges allows me to give the effect of a watercolor. See how the darker edges become apparent as though you're dealing with watercolor painting. A quick way to increase and decrease my brushes, so I can go up to brush tip shape and of course increase my size right here, but I also can use my square bracket key on my keyboard. So after the P letter on your keyboard, we've got left square bracket, which will decrease the size, and the right square bracket, which increases the size. And it does it sort of exponentially. So initially it's going to go from 1 to 10, 1 pixel increment, and then it goes to 5 pixel increments, and then it eventually goes to 10 after 50, and then once I get even higher, it starts going by 25 pixels, and then 50 pixels. So you can see this works for any of my painting tools. This is a really quick way to either increase or decrease your brush size without actually having to navigate to your brush panel and select your size. Let's look at a couple other things here. I'm going to select everything by doing a Control or a Command A, pressing my delete key to delete it all, Control or Command D to deselect. So if we go and select one of our tools here, let's look at the Sharpen tool. So the Sharpen and the Blur tool, remember I said Blur softens and Sharpen makes it more crisp. So there are benefits to this, a little bit though, you have to be cautious. Let's zoom into the flower here and look what happens. So I'm going to use my space bar. Oops, actually let's zoom in a second. So I'm using space bar and Command to zoom in. You can use Command and plus, whatever way method you are familiar and comfortable with. Then just having my space bar gives me my hand tool. That's the quick key for your hand tool, which allows me to move this. So I'm zoomed in fairly close. You can probably see pixel by pixel at this point. This is not high res. With the Sharpen tool, I can click and drag. And now I want to give you a word of caution here because some of these tools have a delayed response. The computer is trying to think so hard and people start dragging, look what happens. I've just degraded my picture because what Sharpen does is looks at the pixels and it makes it a higher contrast. So it actually pulled out reds and purples in my grass to make a higher contrast. This has gone too far. The Blur tool is the opposite, like we said. That will soften, and so you can see that my colors are just going to end up blending together. Again, you have to be cautious because you can go too far with that and make it be very fuzzy. One way that I can also use these tools, all of the brushes tools, is, I'm going to go back to the Sharpen because I can see that a little bit easier. If I click, hold down my Shift key and click again, it makes a straight line. Let's go to the brush tool and just show that. Click, hold down Shift and click. It makes a straight line. I've got some dynamics and other things going on, so it's a little bit more difficult. Click, let up on my mouse, move over, hold down the Shift key and click again. It draws a straight line in between those two clicks. Now the Burn tool and the Dodge tool, again, these are the photography tools, and I'm going to reduce my brush size by using the left square bracket. And if I use the first tool here, so you can see I am basically underexposing this. Now let's go to my Burn tool. Burn, think it burns it. Reduce the brush. I'll go at the bottom of the flower here, and this will overexpose or darken it. Okay, so one is lightening, one is darkening. Again, you have to be cautious because I can drag, and once I let up on my mouse, sometimes it takes a few moments, and then Photoshop finally catches up, and I realize I've gone too far. One thing we can use also with our painting tools is the eyedropper tool. The eyedropper allows us to sample up a color. Remember that when I use my paintbrush, I'm painting with my foreground color. So by sampling up with the eyedropper, I can paint with that specific color. So play around with these brush tools, experiment with them, experiment with some of the different settings. I believe just experimentation is the best way to learn these.